Now, as you guys probably know, I really like psytrance, and I have a playlist of my favorite tracks. There's almost 200 tracks in there, I believe, and one of them recently caught my attention, and what I really wanted to do was just kind of use that as a reference track to make something of my own. Now, the track that I'm talking about is called Gratitude by Hyde, and I'm just going to play a little bit for you so that you get an idea of the track type and what kind of style it is. You can really describe this as a very overproduced, almost very complex kind of track. I don't want to say overproduced in a negative way though, just a lot of attention to details. So here's just a little segment of that track so that you can get an idea of what it sounds like. So I took that idea and I decided to use that as a reference for my own project. And what I came up with is this project right here. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to break down this entire project, and at the end I'll also play the project so obviously you can hear it. Now this is, as I said, not my usual style, so I don't plan on releasing this track actually. Just like the Spin Twist Records track that I did a while back, I'm going to post it on my Experiment or SoundCloud page, but I don't plan on releasing this track in any other way. So with that being said, let's get into the project, and I'm just going to start off with the kick and the bass. When it comes to the kick, one of the things that I've been doing lately is I have a kick group as opposed to just like a kick channel, in the sense that I have my main kick channel in there, and then all of my alternating kicks and all of the other things that I need from my kick are going to be in other channels. That way I get things more organized. So what you'll see is that all of the main kicks are in here and the main build-up kicks and stuff like that. And anytime I need to do a little kick fill or something like that, it is going to be on its own channel. Reverse kicks, which we'll find here, are going to be on their own channel. And anytime I do something with MIDI in terms of like little MIDI things where you have the kick speed up or slow down like this, it's also going to be on its own channel. This is just an easy way to keep things a little bit more organized, but when it comes to the kick itself, it's just a kick from my recent sample pack. This is Projector Kick 11. I believe this is coming from the older sample pack actually, and it's going to be the Quality Kicks pack right here. To be honest, when it comes to the two different sample packs of mine that include kick drums for psytrance, the Psychedelic Drum pack being the other one, these ones are a little bit brighter. They are a little bit nicer to work with because they are BPM tight and they're a little bit more like optimized and a little bit better produced, I would say. But overall, the tonality of this first pack is a little bit darker, and seeing as we are in D sharp and making this really dark, really complex kind of track, this kick just felt a little bit better for this particular production. Moving on to the bass line, what we have is that I'm just using my standard bass preset. This is the preset that I've been using in a lot of my productions lately, and it's also part of my recent preset pack. The only variation that I made for this production is that I set the filter from an 80 dB per octave low pass to 24 dB per octave low pass. Now, I'm not going to go through this patch. There's a lot of different things that you need to know. A lot of them have been explained in my guide for Psytrance Bassline, the recent one that I did, where we basically build up to creating something like this patch here. Just keep in mind that for a patch like this, where it's like fully automatic, all of the processing is being done in the wavetable, so I don't have to do any processing as in multiband processing for the phase shift that we usually do on our Psytrance bassline. What I did do in terms of processing is a little bit of stereo spread. As you can see, it's not too much. The graph is still there and you can see that it's very monocompatible. We also talked about stereoionizing your bassline, and we found that this plugin is actually fully monocompatible, but you can see that we're not really stereoionizing it too much. Then we have a little bit of EQ. Really, my goal was to make it sound darker as well as clickier than the original. So that's what you can see. What I'm mainly doing here is I'm removing some of these frequencies to make it darker sounding, and then I'm reintroducing a little bit of the click for the bassline. You can hear that it just gives it a lot more power. And then just like with the kick group, I have my filtering on there as well as a utility which I use for volume control. And here on the kick group, you can see again, we have the filtering, the volume control, a little bit of EQing, and then I'm just soft clipping it to make sure that it doesn't go above 0 dB. Now, before we continue with this breakdown, I do quickly want to say that if you want to explore this project a little bit more, you can do so by going to my Patreon page where I'll actually upload all of the tracks for this project. That means that you'll get individual files for all of these tracks here, and you can just import them into your own DAW and really dig into the details of this project. This does mean that it's not going to include the mastering, but I'll quickly go over that as well so you can get an idea of what the mastering actually does as well. But in order to access that, you'll have to go over to my Patreon page, which I'll link into the description. With that being said, let's get back into the breakdown. So with the kick and bass out of the way, what I actually started working on is the intro build-up section. So the way that I kind of structured this is that we have a normal intro, but there's actually already a build-up happening here. Normally what you find is that this kind of build-up happens in the breakdown, but I actually have two of these build-ups. There's also one in the breakdown here. And the reason for that is it allows you to be a little bit more complex with your structuring, and obviously also allows you to bring a little bit more energy at the beginning of the track. So we have a few different elements to make this work. We have these bandpass plugs in here. Just opening up and filtering in. We then have some other elements that kind of bring in from the intro. And then here they're rising in frequency with a frequency shifter. And then the final real element that is bringing the energy in this section is going to be the acid line here. So this is just going to be your simple serum patch with a low pass filter on a saw wave. As you can see, no effects in here, nothing else crazy going on. It then just goes into this plugin here. This is the overdrive plugin from Waves. We then go into MX Overdrive. This is just used to really beef up the sound. Without it, it just sounds boring. So you can hear we get some really nice gritty distortion out of that. We also have M Stereo Spread for some stereo widening. Up until this point, the sound was completely mono, so it was a little bit boring in the stereo field, so I wanted to spice it up a little bit. We then have OTT for some really strong compression, a little bit of EQ. Here I'm also using some filters to open it up, as well as raise the high pass filter so that you get more towards the high frequencies by removing some of the lower frequencies. It then goes into another saturator just to beef it up some more and also to clip it here. And then finally we have our delay, which is also opening up over time. I'm actually also going to use this project to show off some automation techniques in a separate video. I don't know in terms of planning when that video will come out, but make sure that you subscribe so that you won't miss it. Either way, after I had that, I realized that I would need to have a lot of different effects to actually make this track work. These kind of complex tracks, they require a lot of different effects because all of them need to kind of be special. If we go through the effects group, you can see that I'm using a whole bunch of different effects, atmospheres, all of that kind of stuff all over the place here. And really, for a lot of these effects, I'm using them specifically for just one purpose. So for example, the impact that we have here only really happens in the intro. You can see it doesn't happen anywhere else. For the breakdown and the outro, we actually have a different impact right here. And the same is true for risers, downlifters, and all of that stuff. And what you'll see here is that I've used a bunch of different riser ideas. I used this synth riser here. This nice laser sound right here. And then finally this kind of noise sound right here, which I just made by using one of the Cashmere exhaust samples, reversing it, and then putting a bandpass filter on top of it with some resonance. And then I have also some other effects in here. This is a little bit of a longer kind of effect sequence that I made out of two different tracks here, as you can see. And you can imagine that this is just like constant noise bed that we can use to just have a little bit of extra excitement in the track. Just some nice high frequencies that sit throughout the whole build-up part of the intro. Speaking of the rest of the intro, I still wanted it to be complex and maintain that complexity. So what I did is I actually separated it in 2 different segments. I have our real kind of intro here, and then there's this little part with the drum beat. This is just a break beat, which I glitched up a little bit, added some filtering to. You can also hear that I overcompressed it with this OTT right here and this saturator. And then I decided to add some other intro elements like this pad here. As well as some melodic elements. These 2 melodies really work well together in that they both kind of have the same progression going down into the root note whenever the new section hits, which I just really like because then there's some synergy between the 2 different elements, and that also nicely ties this section kind of to this section, and then this section here into the build-up part that happens next. So then we get into the drop. I'm not going to go over all of the synth sounds. If there is a particular synth sound that you like, then just leave down a comment below and I can maybe make a separate video on those. But the first one that I want to start out with that I do want to show is this one over here, because it really has an important function in that it just kind of hits immediately. You can hear that when we're coming from the fill, it immediately just gives the track a lot more power when it plays. So to make this sound, what I did is I used a saw wave with its phases randomized. You just take your basic saw wave and then right click randomize all. And then it goes through a bandpass filter right here, which is controlled by this macro. And then it goes through some hyperdimension, a nice gritty distortion, and a compressor to really bring out all of those frequencies that we're reintroducing that were filtered out by the bandpass. It then goes through another bit of compression with this OTT here, really just beefing up the sound. As you can hear from the sound design, it was really like a strong sound, and that's what I wanted from it, a nice strong impact. And then we just have our delay and our EQ here to remove some of the lower frequencies. We have some other sounds in here as well, like this one. Just kind of like a cool format thing. We have this glitchy sound over here. We have this sweep right here. And then this nice impact, which also has a reverse reverb going into it. Now, one of the things that I elected to do for this track is for certain parts of it to work in sections of 8 bars as opposed to 16 bars, which is the normal kind of sectioning that you would use for psytrance. The way that you can kind of see that is that for every 8 bars, there's a little fill or a little pause or a little something special that I'm doing for it. In this case, I'm just removing one section of the bass. And then here, obviously, we have our main fill because we still want to keep to the 16 bar structure overall. So this is going to have longer fills right here. Now, in the next segment of the drop, I really wanted to bring up the energy, especially towards the end of the drop. So I opted for a build-up right here. This does mean that I don't really want to do anything right here because that means that it would get too busy for this segment here. This is not yet the most complex, the most energetic part, so I didn't want to be too complex in my structuring. We then also start by adding some of the drums. Just simple closed hat and snare and clap combo. We then have some sequences coming in, as well as the first few sounds of this group here, which is basically the glitch sequence that I use throughout the whole track. As you can see, I'm using it here, I'm using it later on, and I'm using it in the third drop as well. So all of those sequences together sound like this. And these 2 main sequences are just kind of like a very strong pluck. As well as this kind of rolling sequence over here. This pluck is a very easy sound design trick, which I like to do is just take the tones from my second tones pack. There's so many of them. You have basically infinite options to choose from, as you can see. You can just take one that kind of looks gritty like this. Or in this case, I went with number 318. And then I just put a filter on it, turn that into a plug, and then with a little bit of processing, mainly to re-bring out those frequencies again, just like we did with the other one, the other big impact sound that we saw. And then with a little bit of basic post-processing, you get a very nice plug that you can use to just add a little bit of rhythm, which we're doing in this case. As you can see, just 2 notes playing every bar here. And then that main rolling sequence plug is this thing here, which is actually one of my presets. I think I slightly modified this one for the track, but I don't remember, to be honest. If you really want, you can just compare the settings that I have here with the preset and you will see if there's any differences. To be honest, I don't remember because this project did take quite a while to make actually. To be honest, it did only take me 2 days of time, but I pretty much worked on it non-stop because it really gave me a creativity boost as well. There's going to be another separate video that I want to talk about the last week in terms of creativity that I had, because this is one of the 3 tracks that I basically did the whole production for in the last week and a half. And I just want to chat a little bit about creativity and inspiration and what it really takes to be inspired and write good music. So with all of the sequences out of the way, let's now listen to the build-up that we have right here. One of the interesting things that I'm doing, which you already saw, is that the kicks go faster here. And that means that I have to remove my bass line because I need to make space for these kicks. Obviously, we don't want 2 low frequency elements fighting with each other. Another way that we can help prevent that from happening and also aid the transition a little bit is by already raising up the high pass filter a little bit going into it. And then obviously we support this build-up as well with some other one-shots in here. There's some effects in here as well. And then we have our kind of mini break here of just 2 beats that is going to lead into the next segment of the drop. A few things that I really want to point out is one of the things that I already talked about in my shorts, and that is layering in crashes with your build-up. That just really adds a lot of high frequency energy to it. In this case, what I did do though is I low pass them so that they come in over time. And then in other cases, in other parts where I'm using this, specifically here in the big buildup, which we'll look at later, I'm also frequency shifting them up so the texture changes over time. Either way, I'm also layering in a reverse crash right over here, as well as some drum loop here. So this is just like a snare roll thing. And all of that together, obviously, with all of the effects that are in here, is going to create a nice, intense build-up for this section into the high energy part of the track. For the high energy part, in terms of the drums, we have this loop right here. It's, again, just a very basic loop. When it comes to the loops like this, usually I like to layer in some extra drum loops as well for some extra complexity. But seeing as in this case, we're already doing so many complex things with all of the glitch synths and all of the other things that are happening in this track, I wanted to keep the drums as simple as possible, so they don't take up like too much attention when you're actually listening to it. They still provide a nice spicy high end, which is obviously what you want from your drums, as they are a key part in the groove of your track, but I didn't want them to be too complex for this track. And that just kind of continues on for the entirety of the drops where I really want to have that high energy kind of feeling. So now for, in my opinion, the main star of this track, which is this glitch loop over here. So when it comes to these glitch loops, the way that I do it is I just start off with some synth ideas and I just put them together in a group if I already know that I'm going to be making these. So for example, I know for a fact that the first tone from my tone spec is this nice FM sound here. So I wanted to use that because it's nice and gritty and dark sounding as well. I also wanted to create some other dark synths, so here is a bandpass synth. Again, the sound design itself is going to be very, very simple. It is, again, a tones from the second tone spec going through a bandpass filter and then no effects. You can even see no post-processing on the chain itself. Same is true for the next sounds. This is just a bandpass sweep that comes from my wavetable spec, actually. This is version number 20 here. And in this case, what I'm doing is I'm making it into a plug and then I'm modulating the wavetable position with a note on random. And then all we have to do is just trigger many, many notes to get this kind of plucky bandpass sound. In this case, we're obviously not using the bandpass itself. It is already included in the wavetable. Here we have some squelches, which I'm triggering with a random arpeggiator over 4 octaves. If we look into the MIDI real quick, you will see that there's 4 octaves playing here. And then I'm just using the arpeggiator on random other so that it just triggers random octaves for me. And all I have to do is make sure that there's the pitch modulation as well as the bandpass modulation, which I'm doing manually here in terms of an automation. And as you can see, it's just a repeating pattern over time. There are a few differences between the different parts here, but in essence, this is just an 8-bar loop that just loops over and over. I did make some small manual tweaks throughout it, but I really kind of stopped doing that towards the end here because, to be honest, you don't really notice. There's a few more synths in here. There's this pure glass preset that is from my latest preset pack, which is just a really nice sound to have. I also threw in this very resonant plucky synth here. And the way that I made this is I used 2 different FM wavetables here. This is from the Dada Psy wavetable pack here. I think it is these right here. They come with a left and a right channel, so I just pan them left and right, and then they're both going through a low pass filter with a ton of resonance, no other effects, no thing like that. What you'll see in this like loop making is that all of the sounds are very, very simple. It is the sequencing as well as the effects that you're going to apply to the whole group, which makes it interesting. Final sound that is going to be playing in this section is going to be another one that uses those wavetables that I mentioned before from Dada. And it's just them panned left and right, and that's all you need to do. As you can see, again, no effects, nothing else like that. The main thing that really beefs up this part is, the main part that really beefs up this sequence is going to be the glitch plugin here. Now, this is actually a very old school plugin, and it's currently abandonware, which means that you can just pick it up for free. You do need to bridge it for 64-bit though, so keep that in mind. But this is a crazy glitch plugin that allows you to do all kinds of cool glitchy things. In this case, I've set up a setup pattern. The way that I did that is just by randomizing the effects on pattern 1 here. What that means is that every beat is going to have a different effect, but it's always going to be the same effect throughout the 4-bar loop that you see here. Then in terms of the processing, we basically have very standard stuff. We have some OTT, some stereo spread, an EQ where I'm doing both low pass filters as well as high pass filters in certain points just for transitions. I then have some saturation, a delay, and then actually an LFO tool, which I'm using for sidechaining, which is not something that I usually do, believe it or not. I don't like to sidechain my leads because to me, it doesn't really get the feeling that I want from the track. Like even when mixing, I don't feel like I need to sidechain it to get the presence that I want out of, for example, my kick drum. But in this case, because I was using that reference track, I actually listened to it and I heard that Hyde is using a lot of sidechaining on like his main loops. So I just wanted to emulate that, and that's what this is doing. So that's just going to give it a lot more of a bouncy feeling. Other than that, I'm not really doing anything with the one-shots in this part. I'm mainly focusing on long, drawn-out effects like these. You can hear that I'm using some samples. You can see that I made some of my own. Most of these are just some kind of tone, some kind of gritty sound going through a bandpass filter. That's the easiest way to do these things. Like this one, which I really like. It is not really going through a bandpass filter in the patch, but obviously, as you can see, BP sweep. This went through a bandpass when I made this wavetable. So in this case, I'm using the wavetable. One cool trick here is that I'm using very high voices and then very low detune. So that is going to give it a very nice wide sound. And what also helps for all of these sequences is the delay that you put on them, and then making sure that you put them all the way up in terms of the filtering for it. That way, even the highest frequencies are going to be repeated, and you get this kind of wave of high frequencies coming at you. As opposed to something that sounds like this. And as you can imagine, the high frequencies are going to help by maintaining the energy a little bit more. So this plays for a while, then we come to the next segment here. There is a little bit of a cool fill that I want to show. One of the interesting sounds in this fill is this atmosphere that I made specifically for this fill. What is essentially happening is that we're playing another very gritty tone, in this case another wavetable from, I believe, not this one, but maybe Data Pack 4. It's actually this one here from the third version of the DataPsy wavetable pack. And you can see that it has this nice gritty tone to it. The way that you can actually see that, for those that don't know, is that when it comes to grittiness, a lot of the waveform is going to be like bunched up towards the beginning. And if you want to have it the other way, see if I go back to my tone spec, right? The first one, we know that this is a very gritty sound. We've heard it before. We have something like this. If you want this kind of gritty tone, you see that there's more stuff happening at the beginning than the end. If you want a bubbly tone, you can reverse it right here. And then you see more stuff happening towards the end, and it's kind of speeding up in terms of the amount of stuff happening in the wave cycle. And you get more of that kind of smeary, bubbly kind of effect. So for this one, I went with a very clicky one. And the cool thing that you can do is when you pitch these down to very low octaves, I mean like 2 octaves below the sub bass, they basically become these individual plucks, which is what I'm doing right here in this particular patch here. So if you look at the pitch bend here, you can see it's going down, and it's actually pitching down 2 octaves below the register of the sub bass. Now we're in D sharp, so we're already very low, but going this low really just turns it into this individual kind of pluck that you can hear. Instead of like a tone or something like that, it becomes like almost like a rhythm. So that's really cool to create these kind of slowdown effects, which I utilized a lot throughout this track. As you can see, I use them everywhere. But particularly in this fill, it really shines through because I designed it for this part and it just has a lot of space to really shine through. We also have a little kick fill here. This is just kind of following the rhythm of whatever this synth is doing over here. So you can just look at this synth here and it's following the exact same rhythm of the synth. That's another tip that I can give you is if you're ever working on kick fills and you already have some stuff in your fill, just follow the rhythm of what the other things are doing. An easy way to detect the rhythm is to just check out the elements that you're playing. Say that you're listening to the rhythm of your sequences. You just go into your master recording track or whatever track that you use to resample something. And then you can just look at the rhythm from here. You can just take, okay, here a kick, there's another impact here, so there's going to be a kick, and then there's going to be 2 more kicks over there. And then you just match that with your kicks. Or you can have 1 extra towards the end here to just kind of finalize the phrase. In this case, I also have a reverse kick going into it, and I'm also using that to go into the next segment of the drop. We have some drum fills in here, and what you'll see throughout the project is that I'm kind of matching different drum fills for different parts of the track. As you can see, I'm using some drum fills here, then I'm using another one here, I'm using the combination of these 2 here, I'm using this one over here. And the idea is no drum fill is going to sound the same as one that happened before it, because I'm always matching like different segments of different drum fills to each other. And what you'll find is that for a lot of these fills, they're actually longer than the segment that I use for it. And then I'm just matching other drum fills together to really create a new fill out of the samples that I have. We then go into the section that I wanted to have a little bit warmer. Initially, what I had here was that I brought back the acid beat that was in the intro. A little bit of a strange thing is happening in that this intro element never repeats in the track. It used to be right here, but at the end, it just didn't feel like it had the energy that I wanted from it. So I ended up going with these grid synths instead. The way that I made these is one of the combination tables, again from the tone spec. This is actually a separate download on the Gumroad. So if you already have the tone spec, but you don't have the combination tables, then I highly recommend you go back to the page and you just download these, because they are included with the pack. It's just like a separate download. What these combination tables actually are 2 of these parts combined together into one wavetable. So you just go through it and you get all of the tones from certain parts over here, and you just have them together in one like waveform here in one wavetable. What this means is that we can use an LFO to scroll through the position of the wavetable here and just pick out different individual elements. I believe I already made a video on this concept, but it's something that I've been using so much lately that I want to highlight it again. I'm also using a volume modulation, which you can see right here, just to make it a little bit more dynamic. And then finally, for some movement, we have this low pass filter in here. This is actually mixed down, so you can see it's a normal low pass filter. You just turn it up like this. And this is just moving up and then down over the course of 4 bars. I then wanted to have a little bit of extra movement, so I decided to assign a macro to both the frequency as well as the mix of this phaser here. And then finally for the processing, we have a compressor to just bring out all the frequencies. That's going to be a common tone with this because it's a very aggressive track. So you need to do a lot of compression, a lot of bringing everything together, making sure that the spectrum is nice and flat, that you get some nice high frequencies, some nice mid-range from it, that kind of stuff. I have this frequency shifter here, which I sometimes use for transitions. I have M stereo spread right here. This is just for some stereo generation, as always. We have the OTT, again, to bring out those frequencies to get more aggression out of it. And then we have our EQ here. This is again used a lot for transitioning, not just for general EQ work. What you'll see is that I'm bringing these in over time. So I don't want them to be fully strengthened here, because I actually have this glitch synth in here, which also needs to still have like a lot of the attention. So I don't want it to compete too much. I do want it to raise the energy level over time because we're going into another build-up here. You can also then see where I'm using the frequency shifter right here for the build-up part. And that's also where I'm using the high-pass filter in this case to just go up over time. As you can see, it just moves up and it again aids with transitioning. Again, you're going to have your risers and all of that stuff, but in this build-up, I did something special in that I used this vocal sound coming from Omnisphere and I just pitch bend it up like an octave. You can hear a little bit of a trance gate coming on to it at the end there, and you can hear it also filtering in, but this just really helps adding a little bit of extra warmth to this part here. And you can see altogether it's going to sound something like this. One thing I forgot to mention here in the glitch loop is that I'm turning off one of the major synths for it. As you can see, not every synth is used equally, right? We have a few that are just like sparsely used. This one is sparsely used. And then the 2 main ones are really the ones in the top here. I'm turning off one of them, so I have a little bit more space for my actual grid synths to come in. I also want to highlight these sounds. This is just some kind of bandpass plug here. This is actually a very, very old preset that I made. I think it's one of the first presets that I ever made for Psytrance. I don't sell this one anywhere, but you can see it's just 2 wavetables FMing each other for a nice gritty tone. We go through a bandpass, which is being controlled by note on random. Actually, this one here. And then the note on random is also controlling the wavetail position. It then goes through a downsampler, compressor, and hyperdimension. This is all fairly basic stuff, to be honest. It's just a very nice metallic sound that really fitted the track well and just helps with overall adding a little bit of extra like frequency stuff to it. The real point of these particles, as people tend to call them, or what I like to call them bandpass plugs, is that they create these spikes in the frequency spectrum, right? You can kind of see that every once in a while some part of the spectrum is just kind of bopping up. In this case, because we're doing a lot of downsampling, it's not very clear of an effect. The downsampling is really just there to make it a little bit more present in the high frequencies. Without it, it sounds like this. And you can just really see that it's just bopping up different parts of the spectrum every once in a while. And that just creates a nice variation of different frequencies being highlighted in a rhythmical way. The next step, we go into the progressive part. I did want to add a little bit of a progressive drop here. To be honest, I'm not just inspired by that one track, that Gratitude track from Hyde. I'm also inspired by another artist called Cambium. And he often does stuff like this where it's very complex as well. But he also sometimes uses more of a progressive bassline groove. And I wanted to just emulate that kind of thing as well. So that's what we came up with here. Very important thing here that is happening is that the kick and bass is playing on its own for one entire playthrough of the groove, so that the listener can get used to the groove before we go into any of the other elements. In this case, it's a nice stretched out vocal like this. Just like an old sample that I just really stretched out and put some delay on. The way that I'm doing this groove, you can see that I'm working in MIDI, and the reason why I can do that is because of the way that the patch works. As I said, there's no post-processing on this patch. There's no real big phasing that is happening on this patch. All of the phasing is happening in this saw wave here. Actually, if I play it through, you'll see the actual waveform that it's using. which means that when it comes to the MIDI, I can just really play with the velocity here. If I combine this together and look at the velocity, you can see that I'm using a whole bunch of different velocity setups here. You can see that I have these lower notes here, which are just kind of like your more backing things. And then we have the main ones that play every other offbeat. And then we have this one here that just keeps the like rolling tension of it, but is not as strong as to break the groove that we have going on. So for this last playthrough, what is essentially happening is that we still have this note right here, but it's not as strong as it is right here or right here. So we still maintain that groove that you set up with the note missing here and the lower velocity on this note, which overall just results in this very nice groove. So in here, for the progressive drop, the one-shots are a little bit special in that they were designed for this here. So you're going to have separate one-shots. Again, we're just putting effects everywhere and atmospheres everywhere and stuff like that. All of the atmospheres have kind of gotten into the effects part here. I would normally put them right in here, but for some reason I decided to not do that. I decided to just have this massive effects group. Together with the one-shot, some of the other sequences are coming back, and the main sequence that is coming to go back right here is going to be this flanger sequence. This is a really high energetic sequence, and this is also a perfect excuse to go back into the normal rolling bass line. So right here I have this very nice long fill that just prepares us for the rolling bass line coming back. You can hear that we're right back in the high energy part of the track. One of the things that I want to point out here is the way that I did this sequence is I essentially made a 1-bar sequence. I then duplicated that 3 times, made some variations, and then I took this MIDI, duplicated that 3 times, and then again made some variations. You can see that note lengths are changing, different notes are being placed and unplaced, but it's not completely changing. I wanted that main rhythm that I'm setting up in the first bar to continue, but I just want to have variation upon variation upon variation on that. We also have our bandpass plugs coming back. In this time, I am just filtering them in and out again, and I'm doing that by raising the resonance, so you get this nice resonance spike kind of going down through the frequencies. We also have this other FM synth kind of backing up this section here. This is the same kind of technique where I just took 1 bar and duplicated it over, made some variations. In this case, I didn't bother going through the different MIDIs and making variations here. This is more of a backing element. These backing elements then continue into the next section where we bring back the glitch loop. And then we go into the breakdown where we still keep the kick and bass. I wanted to keep the energy high. I didn't want to go overboard. I didn't want to have full high energy. So I did break them down quite a lot. Like the breakdown is kind of tame, but the kick and bass is always present in here. It's present either here in just like normal kick and bass form, but low passed and at a lower volume as well, or here where we're using the kick very strongly and actually full frequency, no filtering on it in the build-up. We also have some unique effects in here. We have these 2 cool atmospheres that I found. As well as this really cool like effect kick sound here, which almost has like a vocal tendency to it. And that is layered upon your normal kind of impact. So right here, we're going into the build-up. The way that I'm doing that is with another cool sample here. This is one of those airlock samples. This is from volume 2 of the Cashmere pack. In this case, it is high passed. Normally it sounds like this. And you can imagine that this is a very nice and complex way of transitioning into the next section of your track, which is going to be this build-up part here. Now, the build-up revolves around the kick just kind of speeding up like this. We layer in some snare rolls, reverse crash. We have a lot of different crashes here. This is the part where I use the frequency shifter that I talked about before. We're also introducing this new asset line, which is the last sequence that we haven't looked at before. And this is a very complex asset line. As you can see, the main modulation for it goes all over the place. There's a lot of glitchy stuff happening. I'm using 2 different versions of glitch to introduce it. First here, this is kind of the glitch for the fill. And then we have the main glitch that is happening every other bar here. But you can see that it's just the segment of the bar. So it will be glitchy just when it is to 1 here in this last segment of the bar. And you just can overall see that there's a lot of other things happening in terms of the automations. One key one is the pitch bend going up towards the end here to just increase the energy ever so more towards the end of the build-up here. And overall, this element is going to sound like this. Now I'm making heavy use of glide notes in this. Let's just have a look at the MIDI. You can see that we're gliding all over the place. Right here we're using some, here. So there's a lot of gliding going on, and that interacts really well with the modulation that we're doing, as well as the glitchiness. In terms of sound design, it is very similar to the other asset line that we saw, in the sense that you just have a saw wave going through a low pass filter. Again, the starting patch is nothing crazy, and there's no effects on it either. And really where this one differs is that the stereo spread is happening before the distortion. In this case, we're also using a little bit of a stronger distortion. We're using the fuzz instead of the overdrive. So that's just going to be a little grittier and a little bit stronger. And then we have our stereonizing happening before it. What that means is that it's going to interact differently with the actual distortion for it. Like if I place it behind it, you'll hear that it's much less dirty sounding. We then have our EQ for filtering, saturation, echo, and our glitchy stuff here. We also have this utility, which I've shown off many times before, which you can just use or turn on in certain sections where you just want to turn it off. In this case, right here, we just turn it off for a little bit right before we go into the drop itself. And that way we just have a little bit of extra power, in this case for the reverse kick, as well as this little part of the fill to come through. Otherwise, there would be a delay tail in here from the notes that we're playing before, and obviously we don't really want that. There can also be issues with the glitch plugin or any other plugin that may prolong the signal a little bit, so we just use this -infinity utility here to just make sure that we definitely don't have any volume going into this little part here. We again have our sidechaining here. As I said before, this is not something that I usually do, but for this main lead, it really worked well because this needs to balance with the glitch loop, which is also in this segment. And this really is the most intense part of my track. So this is what this sounds like. I quickly want to highlight the bass melody. The way that I made this melody is I just took some of the notes from the asset line that I wrote. Some of the notes from here, I believe this, maybe this one here, and then did some random stuff over here. Towards the end here, you always want to have a little bit of an uplifting thing happening, which wasn't happening in the MIDI itself here. So I just kind of changed this around. But these 2 notes just follow whatever the asset line is doing here and here, so that there's a little bit of connection between the bass line and your main element for this part of the track. One of the other things that I want to show is that I did add a few synth sounds towards this part here for the actual glitch loop. Now for this patch, this is a very old technique that I showed off, I think almost 3 years ago now, maybe even more. And what this essentially is we have this note here, which we're using for our modulation, which means that we untie the pitch tracking of the oscillators, and then we just set up the oscillator pitch manually. This means that we can use a MIDI that looks somewhat like this, something that we have here, where you're just playing all of the notes all the time. And we use that in combination with this arpeggiator, which will just select random notes for us, therefore creating a random modulation. The same is true for this patch, but in this case, we are using it to set up the wavetail position of one of those combination tables. In this case, we have 2 octaves and both of them have 2 voice and then a little bit of detune, and that results in a sound like this. Again, no effects in here. In this next section here, there's a little bit more space to play with. What I'm doing here is I'm using a few more one-shots and also a lot more atmospheres here to just keep the track interesting, but lacking the acid line. Obviously, the acid line is at the end of its life here, in the sense that it has been the main element for 16 bars and we're kind of getting bored as it from a listener's perspective. So I'm just removing that here and we're going to go into a different sound here. This is, again, one of those bandpass plugs. Together with the glitch loop, and then to keep the track interesting, there's a lot of one-shots and effects happening to just maintain the energy and make sure that there's a high energy in this part of the track. Now this segment is a little bit longer, it's 32 bars, but it's also used to introduce the grid synths over a very long period of time for the next segment here. So these are bringing back the grid synths, and then we just go into the outro where we have some of the plugs that we heard earlier coming back. These also exist somewhere in the first drop, so what I'm doing is I'm just reminding the listener of something that happened earlier on in the track. And one of the interesting things here is that I'm actually opening up the filter for this preset, but in this case I'm using the mod wheel because that is by the preset already tied to the filter. When it comes to vocals on this track, I didn't really go through the trouble of getting like a clean vocal theme for the track. I just grabbed a couple of vocals that fit the track. We start with a nice little laughing thing for the intro. I already mentioned this stretch out vocal. It used to be the case that this vocal was throughout the whole track, but I didn't really like the vibe of it, especially not when it was like strung down at its original speed. I have some other vocal effects as well, like these vocal shots here. These are just this track kind of spliced up, and then with a very low decay and a low sustain, you get these kind of plucky vocally sounds. I talked about this one already as well, which is that rising vocal pad. We also have some other vocal chops in here. This is just from a different sample. I chopped it up and then foreman shifted it up. A final cool idea here is to use a vocal as an impact. This is what this sounds like. Just kind of like a big hay sound, which just nicely washes out into different sections. I'm using this as an impact, as I said, so it's at the start of the drop or layered with a crash or something like that. And then finally we have these spoken vocals for the breakdown here.
And no other love can be defined until that love has properly been understood.
Finally, I'll quickly go over the mastering. As you can see right here, I'm using the Shadow Hills compressor for mastering. And then I have Clipper. This is the free clip. I then have a digital EQ here. This is BX Digital V3 Mix. I like this for my mastering EQ. And then finally for my mastering limiter, I have Boost. One of the things that you want to make sure of is that you set oversample with True Peak here and that you have a nice strong attack for this kind of aggressive sound. Overall, the goal is just to get very, very loud in terms of the mastering, which isn't really that hard to do if you know what you're doing. I just used the loudness analyzer to verify that at the most energetic parts of the track, we are actually getting roughly -7 LUFS, which is perfectly fine for a track like this. We don't want to go too aggressive. When it comes to psytrance, it is very strange in that we are making very loud music, but very clean music as well. Like the kick isn't being distorted. The cymbals aren't being pushed into anything. As I said before, in terms of sidechaining, we don't tend to do a lot of that. So everything is very clean, but you still have to do it very loud, which makes mixing and mastering a little bit harder than it would be for any other type of genre. So with all of that out of the way, I'm now going to play the track. I'll pull up some analyzers so you can properly see what is happening as well. So I hope that you enjoyed the track and I hope that you enjoyed the video as well. But that's going to be it for today. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.